Welcome back, and in this video, let's talk about why Australia must remain a democracy and not continue on the path of tyrannical socialism as per the Labour Socialist political party. The video has 5 parts: a description of the freedoms of Australia we all inherited, the warning signs of socialism, socialism's catastrophic historical failures, why democratic social conscience is necessary but without toxic socialism, and why the Australian 2028 federal election is so important to maintain our democratic civilization, especially with one nation as the core leader. Let us know what you think in the comments. Australia is called the lucky country, but we should never mistake it for luck or for permanence. The freedoms we enjoy today were not handed to us by accident. They were inherited, defended, and paid for by generations before us, including the Australians who served in World War I and World War II. Many of them left homes, crossed oceans, and fought against empires, dictatorships, tyranny, and authoritarian controls. Many never came home, with estimates of 60,000 in World War I, 40,000 in World War II, and a total of more than 100,000 Australian personnel who made the ultimate sacrifice. Many returned wounded, damaged, and forever changed. They did not sacrifice, so future Australians could quietly surrender their freedoms to an expanding socialist political class like the Labour Party. They fought for a free country. A country where people could vote, speak, work, worship, disagree, own property, raise families, and build their own future under the rule of law. That is why this debate matters. Australia must remain a strong democracy, but with a social conscience, and definitely not a socialist country where the public services continue to grow much larger, where citizens become much smaller, and our personal freedoms are traded away for political promises. A decent country should care for the elderly, the sick, the disabled, the homeless, and the families under pressure. But we can all agree the Labour Socialist Party should not be forcing people into poverty and reducing open markets. That's what you call socialist Marxism, and should be avoided at all costs. You see, compassion must never become an excuse for control. There is a clear difference between helping people and making them dependent on the state. There is a clear difference between a safety net and a state-controlled society where speech laws restrict your communication, where censorship is introduced and controls you, and those who speak are imprisoned, because that is not free and open democracy. There is a difference between fairness and tyrannical socialism. This difference is what Australians must understand before it is too late and make their 2028 vote count. We're hopefully one nation to restore democracy. Many Australians are routinely speaking out about feeling like the country is moving in the wrong direction. The cost of living is escalating, renters are struggling, mortgage holders are under pressure, young Australians are wondering whether or not they'll even own a new home. Approximately 85,000 construction businesses go into insolvency each year. Construction-related migration is not adequately prioritised from the National Skills Shortage list, yet more than 1,000 people per day migrate to Australia without adequate housing supply, which further impacts food, fuel, and as you all know, the fuel excise ends in June 2026 and will increase another 30 cents per litre. Add that to electricity, insurance, rates, rent, and everyday essentials that keep increasing in costs. Our small businesses are drowning in costs, tax pressure, compliance, power bills, even though Labour promised to reduce power bills, staffing pressures, and nothing but uncertainty with this unstable socialist Labour government. Working Australians are doing the right thing. They work hard, pay tax, follow the rules, and try to provide for their families. But many are asking the same questions. Where is all the money going? Australia is not a poor country. We are rich in land, resources, energy, agriculture, skills, and opportunity. Yet government keeps growing at an exponential rate. Did you know that the government receives more than $25,000 per second in tax revenue? That's $2.3 billion a day and $839 billion per year. Did you also know that public services, public wages, and salaries for government is $249 billion per year? That's over 30% of the total tax revenue. Could you imagine if our public servants removed diversity and equity hires and only hired based on qualifications and merit? Our public servants would actually be productive, efficient, and accountable. However, the reckless spending keeps increasing with no accountability. Bureaucracy keeps expanding, debt keeps building, and taxpayers are expected to burden the costs every time the inefficient and unaccountable public servants continue to put the country into deep debts because of incompetence. These are the early warning signs. Not full socialism yet, but the Socialist Labour Party is moving harder in a tyrannical Marxist direction. More tax, more spending, more regulation, less human rights, anti-speech laws to silence and imprison critics, although criticism is a sign of a healthy democracy. Creates more dependency, more government programs, more politicians telling ordinary Australians that the Parliament knows best, yet these people have the least qualifications. Every time the system fails, the answer seems to be the same. Give government more money, more power, and more control. But if government could spend Australia into prosperity, why are so many Australians struggling and going homeless? If higher taxes solved everything, why do working families feel poorer and paying rent becomes much harder? If government control always fixed problems, why has history shown the complete opposite again and again? Whenever big government get out of the lives, with open markets and privatization, economies thrive, employment increases, taxes decrease, and individuals experience greater prosperity. Why is it always socialism that destroys people's lives, and democracy needs to be reinstated, defended, just to maintain healthier living standards? So why do we continue in the same toxic cycle? One nation for our 2028 federal election and restore our democracy, and repeal all anti-free speech laws that have been imposed on us, and address our national issues like cutting government waste, housing supply increase, and the right migration, what I like to call cultural compatibility. History gives us serious warnings. Socialism has been sold to people as equity, equality, fairness, social justice, and liberation. But when it becomes state control, central planning, collectivization, price controls, nationalization, rationing, more censorship, and one-party power, the results have been devastating. Look at Maoist China. During the Great Leap Forward, post-World War II, the Chinese Communist Party forced society into a centrally planned socialist experiment. Farmers lost control, food production became politically controlled, false harvest numbers were reported to please the politicians. The result was one of the worst famines in human history, with tens of millions dying of famine, with most estimates ranging between 30 and 50 million people died. Not because people forgot how to farm, harvest, and distribute the food, but because socialist ideology replaced reality, where politicians controlled food production and not the private industry. Therefore, the logistics and coordination of activities failed, and it was open markets and capitalism in the 1970s which brought the Chinese people out of poverty. Look at the Soviet Union. The Soviet system promised a workers' paradise. Instead, it produced repression, shortages, fear, more censorship, strict anti-free speech laws, economic stagnation, and more famine. Under Stalin, socialism helped produce the Holodomor in Ukraine, which was a man-made famine that killed millions. The Soviet Union had land, resources, workers, scientists, oil, gas, minerals, and military power. But socialism still failed to create lasting prosperity for ordinary people because the state controlled too much and people's freedoms were too little. Look at East Germany. West Germany embraced democracy and an open market economy. East Germany lived under communist socialism. West Germany became prosperous. East Germany became a surveillance state in very similar ways to Australia, having anti-democratic speech laws forced upon us, with prison sentences for simply speaking. Again, like I said before, a healthy democracy values free speech as a basic human right. The Berlin Wall was not built to keep Westerners out. It was built to stop East Germans escaping. That alone tells us everything. When people had a choice, they fled from socialism toward freedom. North Korea, Cuba, Venezuela give the same warnings in different forms. When you have state control, restricted freedom, anti-speech, shortages, hunger, fear, economic collapse, and millions of people trying to escape, these are not population governing systems that work. A country can be rich in resources and still be destroyed by toxic politicians obsessed with their control, bad ideas and policy, and willing to imprison people for simply speaking, and quite often, much worse. These are the lessons Australia must not ignore. Otherwise, we will maintain the same socialist trajectory we are heading in. The 2028 federal election is our opportunity to keep our country as a functioning democracy, not a socialist Labor government, in my political opinion, while I still have it. Australia should not become a cold, anti-progressive country either, but rather continue to develop a strong social conscience to deal with social issues. Uphold free speech and no censorship, so we know what people from all backgrounds are thinking, and encourage all people to contribute and debate without fear. We should care about our pensioners, veterans, people with disabilities, the sick, the homeless, working families, and young Australians whom are locked out of housing. But the answer is not socialism. The answer is not punishing those who take risk and achieve success. The answer is not crushing small business into oblivion. The answer is not taxing families, individuals, and businesses into exhaustion. The answer is not handing politicians more power and hoping they suddenly become wise and competent. The answer is simple: a stronger democracy with a social conscience. That means accountable government, responsible spending, lower pressure on families, reward for work, respect for private property, support for small business, more housing supply, and start prioritizing skilled construction-related migration, reliable energy, not expensive, environmentally costing unsustainable ways such as wind turbines, stronger economies, stronger communities, and help for people who genuinely need it, without making them permanently dependent on the state. In my opinion, a universal basic income that allows and enables people to cover the basics so no one goes without the essentials, but still motivates people to continue working. Australians create wealth. Workers create wealth. Farmers create wealth. Builders create wealth. Truck drivers create wealth. Miners, tradies, small businesses, families create wealth across generations. Government should protect that, not confiscate it. Every dollar government spends must come from somewhere. It comes from taxpayers, borrowing, inflation, and it costs future generations. There is no magic money. There is only the Australian people paying the bill. That is why reckless spending matters. That is why higher taxes matter. That is why democracy, accountability, and economic freedom matter. And that is why a socialist political party like Labor will further put our country into a lower standard of living. And in 2028, we have a chance to go to the ballot box and put our country into a better direction. The next federal election in 2028 matters more than any other time Because democracy is what separates us from total socialist, totalitarian, Marxist governing. But because democracy gives Australians the peaceful power to correct our country's direction, we do not need revolution, we do not need violence, we do not need socialist authoritarianism. We have the democratic ballot box. We have open debate for now, which is protected in our constitution. We had free speech, but if one nation is elected, free speech and no censorship will be enshrined into our constitution to reinforce and protect your basic human rights of speech and opinion, and not just political discourse. We should have the right to criticize any political affair as per the 1992 High Court ruling, but also voice our opinions about any other matter without the fear of being imprisoned. We have the right to vote out governments that continually fail us. That is what our veterans helped preserve from 2 world wars. That is what previous generations built that we all enjoy today. And that is what our generation must defend against socialist, Marxist governing. At the next 2028 federal election, Australians should ask themselves a series of questions. Which political parties respect freedom of speech? We know it's not Labor. Which parties respect private property? Not Labor. Which parties understand small business? Not Labor. Which parties will reduce government waste? Only one nation is willing to. Which parties will protect families from escalating costs? Only one nation. Which parties will defend democracy? Only one nation is willing to protect your human rights to free speech. Which parties will stop Australia drifting towards socialism? Only one nation. Australia does not need to become a socialist Marxist country. We can be generous without being controlled. We can have compassion without socialist communism putting fear into our lives. We can have a safety net without destroying people's aspirations through severe tax hikes. We can help the vulnerable without pushing the productive small businesses into tax oblivion. We can protect workers without destroying and disincentivizing businesses and startups. We can build housing without excessive bureaucratic overreach. We can be fair without surrendering our personal freedoms. That is the Australian way. Opportunity, not punishment. Freedom, not fear. Democracy, not Marxist socialism. Australia is still one of the greatest nations on earth, but it will not stay that way unless Australians are willing to defend it. Our veterans left us a free country. We owe it to them, we owe it to ourselves, and we owe it to the next generation. Australia must remain a strong democracy with a social conscience, but not a socialist country. Because the future of Australia should belong to free Australians, not state-controlled people under socialism and Marxism. Our country was built on the concept of democratic freedoms for all Australian citizens, including freedom to speak and to live in a peaceful, quiet, civilised manner and contribute to political discourse. However, the toxic culture of socialism, its left-wing extremism, tyrannical autocratic dictatorship-style governing is creeping into our daily lives. The 20th century socialist countries have failed, causing tens of millions of lives to be lost from increased poverty and subsequent famine. We have a chance in 2028 to maintain our democratic values, vote for one nation that advocates for no censorship and free speech for all citizens, and have these human rights protected in the Constitution. Alternatively, the country will continue on its current downward trajectory into socialism, where we continue to see the same historical repeats of the 20th century. Lessons not learnt. So who are you voting for in 2028? One nation? Thanks for listening. I'll see you on the next one.